One second. Yeah. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll be discussing about one case. It's a one second. It's a 8-year-old female child with a history of abdominal pain since days, which is sudden in onset and reduced on taking medication. Child was initially examined in a private hospital, noticed swelling in the lower abdomen, and was referred to IGHH for the further management. There are no other pressure symptoms, weight loss or loss of appetite, or no history of fever or anything. Just child had only abdominal pain. On examination, child is alert and active, vitals are stable, per abdomen is soft, non-tender, and lower abdominal fullness is present on inspection. On palpation, there is a 18 to 10 centimeters ovoid mass which is firm in consistency, non-tender, with a smooth surface. It's freely mobile, transversely extending from above the umbilicus to pubic symphysis. Perrectal examination was done, which shows mucosa is free and no mass felt perrectally. Cardiovascular examination was normal and the respiratory system was normal. Based on the history and clinical examination, the differential diagnosis can be germ cell tumor, it can be a chronic ovarian torsion, rhabdomyosarcoma, or a pelvic neuroblastoma, or a benign ovarian diseases like follicular cyst and polycystic ovaries. So on investigations, we found to have a normal blood picture where CBC was normal, RFT and LFT were normal, but tumor markers, AFP is normal, beta H is elevated and LDH is elevated. CA125 is still awaited. Coming to radiological investigations, ultrasound was done, which shows circumscribed lesion of 6 into 10 centimeters in the umbilical region. No dilated pelvic calcium system or no renal involvement is seen. Coming to CECT abdomen.
That will be discussed by the Department of Radiology from Kidwai. Dr. Anjali, if you can just describe the radiology findings and share your screen. Dr. Anadi, okay.
Should we switch?
Okay, you're not audible. Are you speaking now? Hello? Can you describe the findings, please? You're not audible at all. Hello? Hello? Dr. Anadi, not audible?
If Madhu is there, he can at least give a voiceover, it will be good.
Yeah. Sir, Dr. Madhu or Dr. Kapali, if you can just let us know what are the findings in the CT. Hello? Should we just come back to this case, sir, and take up the remaining cases updates?
Yeah, no, you can just do one thing, Pooja. Till
Yes, sir.
at least they get it, at least you can discuss with us the plan so far. What are the factors you think and how is it going to impact the management? What is running in your mind?
Yes, sir. So I have examined this child, and like Rohit has already described, it's predominantly a pelvic mass which is freely mobile, and the child otherwise seems to be normal, does not have any other issues in terms of lymphadenopathy or any respiratory distress or cough or any other symptoms which might suggest a metastasis. It seems to be a localized lesion on clinical examination, and on the examination of the CT films, what we can see, I am not able to move the slides over here, but whatever I remember of seeing this child, it seems to be a lesion which predominantly is arising from, I think, the left side ovary, if I'm not mistaken, and it is a pedunculated lesion. So predominantly the first differential diagnosis that we would like to consider is a germ cell tumor in this child. And what I had discussed previously regarding any peritoneal fluid or fluid in the pouch of Douglas, so they had told me that it doesn't seem like there is any peritoneal fluid on the CT abdomen. So it seems like a localized tumor. And the options that we have in this child were particularly whether to go ahead with a biopsy or to excise the lesion. Now, because the child has elevated beta HCG as well as, it seems like it's a localized lesion and the CT thorax is not showing any metastatic disease. So I think it would be prudent to excise the mass and send it for histopathological examination followed by adjuvant chemotherapy. That is what we were thinking for in this child, sir.
What
And lymph nodes are also
biopsy, Pooja. Okay, because the AFP is not raised, it's only beta
Yes, sir.
HCG. And
Yes,
beta
sir.
HCG is also not severely elevated.
Beta HCG, sir, it is definitely elevated for the child's age, and considering that it is arising from the ovaries, I don't think, like, even if it is like the differential diagnosis that we would be considering in this child would be a rhabdomyosarcoma or a germ cell tumor, which is, if it is involving the lesions, even post-operatively, even for local control, we would have to excise the lesion. So considering that, I think the excision, if the, like I already had discussed with the surgeons and they said that the planes were clear and the excision is possible. So I think excision would be a good choice in this child, sir. And the lymph nodes, as far as I remember, they said were not very enlarged. I still have to get a expert opinion, but if they can share the screen with us or discuss, then we can know. But this is what I know of the child and have discussed with the radiology people.
Okay. Just argument's sake, if you think it is not operable or if a differential diagnosis of other things were also being entertained,
Yes, sir.
would you be comfortable doing just an FNAC or would you like to do a true cut?
So definitely, actually speaking, I would always prefer a biopsy only, sir, a true cut biopsy, because you get the entire architecture of the lesion, and it will always give us a definite view. Of course, because this is a very superficial lesion, biopsy is not an issue. But this problem of deciding FNAC versus biopsy comes more in case of presacral lesions or lesions which are very close to vital structures. There, weighing the pros and cons, and FNAC would be advisable. But here in this case, where such a superficial lesion is there and it's not really encompassing the vessels, I would like to go for a true cut biopsy in this child.
Because they're doing FNAC and waiting for a week.
Yes,
they're
sir.
losing precious time. Would rather go ahead with a biopsy in case
Yes,
it
sir.
is needed, or in this case,
Yes, sir.
perhaps I think
Yes, sir.
people have got in.
Can you hear me from the Department of Radiology, Dr. Anadi? It's okay, sir. What I'll ask Anadi to do is share the findings or something after we discuss. So I think that is the plan for this child. We'll take over the other cases first and then come back to this case later so that we don't waste everybody's time.
Any other discussion either from Narendra? I can see Narendra or Gauri or
Yes, sir.
Raghav, sir.
Are there any other concerns which you'd like us to address or speak about, sir? Narendra, sir?
Nothing. This apart from the tumor, it is quite large and looks more of solid.
Yes, sir.
The planes looks okay, and there is no compression on any other adjacent structures. In this situation,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
so, without any metastatic deposits or any other metastatic lesions.
Yes, sir.
So I think the surgery is a straightforward option for these patients.
Yes, sir.
Don't you
Definitely.
think-
Only thing
What is
Narendra
your thoughts?
is
Pooja?
laparoscopy an option?
I don't think laparoscopy is an option because it's solid.
Yes, sir.
That's exactly what you say.
So,
Whenever you are suspecting ovarian malignancy, but not to
Yeah, I think that is one of the thumb rules, sir. That laparoscopic. Actually, one second, sir.
a lot of
Yeah, now can you hear me clearly, sir?
yeah.
Yeah. So that is one of the thumb rules, sir. Actually, if you are suspecting an ovarian malignancy, laparoscopy is never a good option for two reasons. One, because you need to take, peritoneal washings for these children. And second, lymph nodal biopsy, and you need to look at the opposite side. This thing, though it may be feasible on laparoscopy, sometimes lesions can get missed, and you can't do an appropriate. And a staging laparotomy is a must, so you can't do it appropriately on a laparoscopic view. So
No, I think
Beyond the
Pooja,
stage
Yes, sir.
also, we are violating
so
the
staging
principles. For example,
laparotomy still can be done effectively by laparoscopy.
Yep.
Okay, sir.
Retrieving this tumor
Exactly.
Yes, sir.
still is a problem. Anyway, you are going to make a big incision to
Yes,
retrieve
sir.
this tumor. And also peritoneal washes can be taken, biopsy, momentumectomy and momental biopsy, peritoneal biopsy, everything can be done laparoscopically.
Yes, sir.
Even iliac lymph node sampling also can be done. But since there is no lymph nodes here,
Yes, sir.
but apart from that, everything can be done. Even people do put in the retriever bag and make an incision and take it out also.
Yes, sir.
But ultimately, you're going to give an incision definitely to retrieve the tumor.
Yes, sir.
So,
Now the thing is, like we had a similar child, sir. I want to discuss it over here. She was an 8-year-old girl. Of course, they didn't suspect a malignancy to begin with in the first place. They suspected an ovarian torsion. So this child, like when they went ahead and they thought that it's a ovarian lesion, looks like a benign lesion. They went ahead laparoscopically. No staging procedure was done at all for that child. So she landed up with us with just the ovarian lesion being excised with no staging laparotomy being done. And then post-op, we were in a fix because we didn't know how to stage the tumor.
Can you hear me, ma'am? Hello?
Yeah. Anadi, Dr. Anadi? Is that Dr. Anadi? Hello? 1 second.
Anadi has become speechless again. I guess.
Hello, can you hear me, ma'am? Hello?
Yeah, now I can hear you, Dr.
Please.
Anadi. Finally.
Yes. Can I start, ma'am?
Yeah, please start.
Please.
Yes. So, 80-year-old child with an abdominopelvic mass, the contrast-enhanced CT shows a large ovoid heterogeneously enhancing mass lesion measuring approximately 10 by 7 by 11 centimeters. And as we can see, it is predominantly homogeneous. However, it shows a few non-enhancing areas within, which is most probably says to have necrosis. And what we can see is that the center or the epicenter of this lesion, we have on imaging, we can say that it is mostly arising from the left ovary, primarily because of these dilated vessels, which we can see here, which represent the left gonadal vein. And if we trace this up, we can see that it goes and drains into the left renal vein here.
Yeah.
So that's how we have derived the epicenter of the lesion to be from the left ovary. And the other findings are that there are multiple paraaortic lymph nodes, largest one in the left paraaortic group, just below the left renal hilum, measuring around 7 millimeter in maximum short axis.
Okay.
And also few superior mesenteric lymph nodes, largest measuring 5 mm in maximum short axis.
Okay.
Other findings, the other solid organs, liver, pancreas, spleen, all were normal. There was no ascites, and also the bones look fine. There were no skeletal metastasis.
Okay.
So considering these findings, the differentials from our side will be primarily the germ cell tumor group itself, and within the germ cell tumors, first we would think of a dysgerminoma, primarily because of the presence of lymph node lymphadenopathy, and second will be probably an immature teratoma.
Okay.
So these are the differentials.
Dr. Nadi, I would like you to comment on two more things. Like
Yes.
one thing is the lymph nodes you said are around 7 millimeters. So what is it that you consider as significant lymphadenopathy when the surgeon is doing a staging laparotomy would require to be biopsied? That is number one. And second thing is there any free fluid or peritoneal fluid in the pouch of Douglas or otherwise to consider that the tumor might have ruptured or there are any signs of tumor rupture?
No, ma'am. No. So that's what. So in the pelvis, there's no fluid. There's no ascites as such. No fluid in the pouch of Douglas. And second, retroperitoneal lymph nodes usually some literature says that up to 1.5 centimeters in short axis is considered as significant. However, even though it is sub-centimeter lymph nodes, we have to look at the morphology of the lymph nodes before saying that this is benign or this is malignant. Since these lymph nodes have loss of fatty hilum and they are multiple in number, predominantly on the left side also. So it should be considered. It should be suspicious. Even though the size is less, it doesn't mean that these are not. We can pass it off as benign lymph nodes.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I would like to ask you a question. Now that he's incidentally, Anadi has given a brilliant analysis, including about the ovarian vessels, which perhaps we would have missed it. And thank you very much. His analysis is brilliant. And now that he's talking about lymph nodes, what I'm saying is at the time of surgery, is it necessary to take out all the lymph nodes or just only those which are suspicious?
Probably a sampling, sir. Like what usually retroperitoneal lymph node dissection is not recommended in children, pediatric germ cell tumors. What would be done is lymph node sampling along with the peritoneal washings. So it has very limited role, RPLND in pediatric germ cell tumors. So we would do a sampling.
So we are going to go there and see whatever lymph nodes are there. We enlarge ones, we just take it out for sampling.
Yes, sir.
More than it's not like a Wilms tumor that you're going to look for and remove everything.
No, sir. Because anyways, we're going to be giving systemic chemotherapy, which will be taking off the lymph nodal metastasis. The staging is what is going to vary,
That
which
needs some
will.
clarifying for the sake of the PGs and others.
Yes, sir, for sure. So,
just from the radiology, just wanted to
yes,
know
sir.
how do we, when you look at the enlarged lymph nodes, how do we know that the fatty LM is preserved or not preserved? Can we just have a look at the lymph node and have just a few points to discuss that?
So,
lovely. Please go ahead.
Yes. So, yes, in one plane, it may not be easy to call it as a loss of fatty alum. So, usually, suspicious lymph nodes we try to assess in all the planes, that is axial, coronal, and sagittal. And if we don't see any fat attenuation tissue within it, something like a hilum, so we confidently say that okay, there is loss of fatty alum and these are suspicious. So we assess in all three planes, axial, coronal, and sagittal, and then only we comment on whether there is loss of fatty alum or not. Density also, the density also changes. So fat density will be dark, and if we see that the lymph nodes are homogeneously enhancing and there is no hyperdense tissue or dark tissue within it, we can confidently say that there is no fatty hilum.
Okay. So just for the sake of discussion, like sir said, so like deciding whether to go ahead with the chemotherapy first or excision of the tumor first, it basically depends one on the size of the tumor. If you have a really large tumor which is involving the entire abdomen, compressing on vital structures such as the kidney, causing renal function compromise, then in those cases, obviously surgery is not possible. What you'd like to give is ideally a 3-drug chemotherapy, but if it's not possible, a 2-drug chemotherapy which would not affect the kidneys, reduce the size, and then go ahead for surgery. But otherwise, in all other cases where you can clearly delineate the lesion and you feel that it is excisable, we can go ahead with excision of the tumor first, followed by chemotherapy. So there is no definitive literature that says that you have to do either surgery first or chemotherapy first.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. So now I think so. This is the plan for this child. So we will be going ahead with the
special thanks to the Kidway radiology team. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hello.
Yeah. Sir.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Please, sir.
Yeah. Hello, ma'am.
Who's this? Doctor?
Yeah, ma'am. Rohit. Ma'am, this is Rohit.
Yeah, Dr. Rohit. Please.
Today we did a staging laparotomy with the excision of the tumor.
Yes.
It was a tumor which I am showing it.
Okay. That's great.
Top findings are 20 ml of peritoneal fluid along with no retroperitoneal lymph nodes are palpable. Tumor size of 10 into 6 centimeter size.
Okay.
The opposite, one second. This was the opposite ovary, which is having the exophatic component, which
we
have taken a small biopsy from here also.
That's great.
And lymph nodes are not enlarged.
Not enlarged.
Not enlarged. So, like again, one of the thumb rules is,
for example,
yes, sir, please.
In this case, where the radiologist has said lymph nodes, but on table we are not able to identify lymph nodes for sampling, how will you proceed?
And this is a difficult situation, sir, because 7 millimeters, like even if you were to see, like on radiology, maybe feasible, but if they're actually on the OT table, it might not be feasible to sample. So, considering that the child already has peritoneal fluid, I was discussing the same thing with Vinupriya, whether we would consider, there are no signs of tumor rupture. Maybe it is because of backflow or back pressure changes that we have some amount of peritoneal fluid. So, we will send the fluid for analysis in this case, because overlying there is no sign to say that there is rupture. So, if the peritoneal fluid washings come out as positive, we treat it as a stage 3. Otherwise, I think we'll have to treat it as a stage 1 itself.
So other thing is that in this patient, so
yes,
since we know that there is a 1.5 centimeter node is there exactly at the wherever that relation to the bifurcation or either internal iliac, whichever location is there, that area can be actually, even though it's not visible, we can actually open the peritoneum and see it inside. So many times we'll be able to see that.
Okay, sir.
So even though it's just looking at the area, you may not really appreciate the nodes because some of the nodes will be between the vessels, which may not be visible physically. But since you know that radiologically there are nodes are there, that specific area can be explored and sampling can be done.
Understand? You can hunt for it basically. My next question is: the argument sake, would a PET scan or something useful maybe after about 4 to 6 weeks look for any disease in the metastasis?
Actually, the role of PET scan in germ cell tumors is not very clearly established, sir. But in such cases where, like I previously spoke about a child where staging procedure was not done adequately, in such cases we do get a PET scan done. Where if it is showing any metabolic activity, then we can consider it as positive and upstage the tumor. So, like it is not evidence based, but this is something we practically do, and we have done it in the past for some children.
Oh, thank you.
We can do that, sir.
Good discussion. Good discussion.
Pooja, this is Dr. Premlata here.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon. Please tell me, ma'am.
Good afternoon. No, the specimen has been sent to our department. When was the surgery done?
Today, ma'am. Just today in the afternoon, before the tumor board, they were operating on this case, so it will be sent, ma'am. Yes, they are too fast. They took images, everything, and they put it up on this thing also. Just now it got operated.
Okay.
Breaking news.
Yes, ma'am. So fine, fair enough, I think.
Excuse me, ma'am. This was an exophytic lesion over the tumor.
Okay. Oh, okay. This is a separate exophytic lesion you're saying, isn't it?
I mean, over the tumor there is an exophytic lesion.
Exophytic lesion. Okay, fine. So, sir, Narendra Babu, sir, now that 1.5 centimeter lymph node that Anadi was talking about, so would you be exploring this child, or?
No, I think since your lymph node sampling is it is well within the plan of the whole procedure.
Yes, sir.
So if it was exposed that area specifically, yes, probably would be able to find the lymph nodes. That's what my contention is. That.
Okay.
Otherwise, now whether to re-explore, I think I think you can treat it as take it as a positive lymph node and
treat it as stage 3, sir.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. We'll do that, sir. We'll do that. All right. So thank you. Can we go on to the next case discussion, please?
Yeah. Rohit,
if you're in the same room where the Vinupriya is hosting this thing, you have to go in another room. That is what is causing the disturbance. So the next child we're going to be discussing is an infant who had presented with a cheek mass, an infantile myofibroma, which was diagnosed, and then subsequently a case discussion had happened between various departments. It was a multidisciplinary meeting which was organized by Ramesh sir and Dr. Vinupriya, where the maxillofacial surgeon, the pediatric oncologist, the anesthesia team, everybody was involved, and there was a beautiful discussion regarding the planning for this child's surgery. And Dr. Vinupriya is going to give us the highlights of what was discussed, how the child was operated, and then what is the final outcome for this child.
Yes, ma'am. It was a 7-month-old baby who presented with the right cheek mass. This was discussed in the Kidwai tumor board. This was a tumor. It was involving the orbital, orbital bony window and ethmoid and maxilla. And also there was intracranial extension in the superior aspect. So histopathology showed it was a low-grade myofibroblastic sarcoma with a differential of either desmoplastic fibroma, low-grade sarcoma with a proliferative index of 8 to 10% only. So finally it was decided that child might not benefit from either chemo or radiotherapy, and plan was for surgical excision. So we went ahead with the endoral incision, that is the incision line can be seen here. This was the incision line. And then we raised a flap, and we could get good margins from all sides. And tumor was excised. Only superiorly it was abutting the dura, but neurosurgeons, Dr. Puneet sir, was able to get the plane there, and the dura was not opened. And for the reconstruction, we went in with 2 ribs, 3rd rib and the 5th rib. And then we used 2 flaps. One is the temporalis flap and one is the pedicled pectoralis major flap. So this was the outcome of the child intraoperatively. So this is the outcome what we have. One complication what we have is the right-sided brachial plexus palsy we have. The child is having no movements on the right side, probably because of it was only a stretch palsy. That's what neurologists have told. The MRI of the brachial plexus showed no injury to the brachial plexus per se. So the histopathology now has come as infantile myofibroma with inked margins being positive for tumor cells. However, the deep margins are negative. Now, next is with the positive margins, what do we do? When we review the literature, there is a good paper published in the Pediatric Blood Cancer article.
Vitupriya, just one doubt for me.
Yes, sir.
What is the ink margin? What is the deep margin?
Sir, we actually at one area of the lateral margins when we were dissecting the tumor, over the lateral or the medial margins actually, we found a suspicious area which was in contact with the tumor. So that margin we took it separately. So that came as positive for tumor cells. Whereas the main tumor which we sent, the deeper margins, that is the over the muscles, everything is negative.
Okay. So the usually ink margin means when the tumor is subjected to the sectioning, so they completely ink it and see whether the ink the tumor is reached up to the ink. Is that?
Champa, would you like to speak?
Champaka ma'am, if you would like to comment on this.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Yeah, actually, it was a well encapsulated lesion. Almost there was a fascia around it. There was a focal defect which showed the margin. Only one area of the margin looked involved, but however, there were skeletal muscle bundles which we took it as a deep margin, true deep margin that was free. But one of the, like she said, I don't know whether it's a lateral or medial margin because it was not tagged and told this is a medial or this is a lateral margin, was focally involved by tumor. But the true deep margin was free. Skeletal muscle, which showed skeletal muscle was free.
Ma'am, can you please explain the difference once again between the inked and the true deep margins?
See, we took the true deep margin as a skeletal muscle.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, and it was fairly encapsulated tumor.
Yes, ma'am.
Where one of the margins, I don't know whether it was medial or lateral because it was not mentioned which was a margin there.
Yes, ma'am.
But one of those areas showed focal tumor involvement.
Yes,
so I don't know whether it was a lateral or medial margin, but the deep margin was free.
Okay.
It had skeletal muscle.
Fair enough, ma'am.
Madam, for me, when the ink margin is positive, that means the beyond that there is a muscle and that muscle is negative. Or
when
it is a different place.
It was muscle was in a different place.
So basically, at one area the positivity.
Yes, sir. Yes, one area was positive.
Yeah. So because when we say ink margin is negative, deep margin is positive, sometimes we feel that, but at the end of the day, it's everything is negative.
Exactly.
Because, yeah. So it may not be.
It's not. So that means one margin which is effective.
Margins were not tagged. Margins were not tagged and mentioned lateral, medial, deep. So we took it as one of the margins focally involved.
Yeah. Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Narendra, just elaborate. At the time of surgery, actually the tumor which is abutting on the orbit and on the meninges, we couldn't really go beyond a margin. We just had to stick to the capsule and took it out. And perhaps that is the area where there is sort of
maybe sir. Just I'm trying to understand the terminology.
No, I understand. I got it. No, it is something new for me too. Thanks. Very good. No problem. So how do you go about it, Pooja, now?
Yes, sir. Sir, when we actually review the literature, there is one paper for risk-adapted therapy for infantile myofibromatosis. So infantile myofibromatosis can be solitary or multiple.
Yes.
Based on this, what they tell is the solitary lesions, when it is complete is possible, then surgery is the treatment of choice. When resection without sequel appears to be difficult, even there are papers where they have actually wait and they watched, and there are some reports which show spontaneous remission also.
Yeah.
So some reports have discussed the possibility of spontaneous regression and recommended a watchful waiting in cases of limited involvement, and also with positive microscopic margins, that is the Arwen disease, they found that there is no increase in the recurrence rates. And they do. So there is no indication for a redo surgery or any adjuvant therapy in this case. But however, in multicentric forms, chemotherapy seems to be the treatment of choice, particularly when there is life-threatening progressive disease and inoperable tumors.
Yeah. So she's right,
will
sir.
chemotherapy be useful in such a low mitotic index?
Actually,
in multicentric ones they have used, sir.
So like what we discussed or reviewed in the literature is this form of myofibroma, infantile myofibroma, which we see. It can occur in three forms, sir. One is the solitary form and visceral form. Visceral form can be with, the multifocal form can be with visceral involvement or without visceral involvement. So three forms: solitary, multifocal with visceral, and multifocal without visceral involvement. So usually these solitary forms, surgery is enough, and the patients do well with surgery. But those which have visceral involvement, like in the form of GI or other things, in those chemotherapy may be indicated. What we had in this child was a solitary mass lesion, and that's why surgery would be the treatment of choice for this child. However, they have said that whatever is the situation, if the surgery is going to be extremely mutilating, or you feel that the child may not tolerate the surgery, in those cases they have done watchful expectancy also, especially in children less than 2 years. But because this child had such a disfiguring lesion and it was progressively increasing size, watchful expectancy was not an option, but it has been done in some other cases where the size of the lesion was smaller. So these are the options for treatment, sir. And chemotherapy, like she said, no, not much role in solitary, but more so in multifocal lesions with visceral involvement.
Pooja, just for discussion, how does this compare with infantile fibrosarcoma, its close cousin?
It's a close cousin only, sir. Yeah. Yeah, it's basically it's
locally aggressive.
So this is a locally aggressive lesion.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, this is yes, sir. This is a locally aggressive lesion only. The likelihood or the potential for metastasis is extremely rare, and locally aggressive in the form that it can cause bony destruction also. So I believe this child also had some amount of bony destruction. So, whereas infantile fibrosarcoma, some cases have been reported, very less, like less than 1 or 2%, where even metastatic disease has been noted. So, although the histopathology, like I think the pathology people can tell us similar, they are from the same group of lesions, but with subtle differences in IHC. Ma'am, would you like to elaborate as to what would be the differences between infantile fibrosarcoma and myofibroma on IHC?
See, this myofibroma, these tumors are thought to arise from the pericytes of the vessels.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is the latest thing. Earlier it was grouped under myofibroblastic or fibroblastic tumors.
Yes,
so which group infantile fibrosarcoma belongs?
Yes, ma'am.
This group of tumors, infantile myofibroma, they are positive only for smooth muscle actin.
Semi.
Yeah. And they're negative for other markers like desmin, caldesmon. Unlike infantile fibrosarcoma, they are thought to arise from myofibroblastic. Now, this is a different category of tumors.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. Now, recently it has been categorized as a different category of tumors.
Yeah, it is a spectrum of myopericytoma and myofibroma. So, they are pericytic group of vascular tumors. They arise from the pericytes of the vessels. Unlike the infantile fibrosarcoma, which is myofibroblastic or fibroblastic tumor.
Got it, ma'am. And but morphologically, it would be very difficult to distinguish, or like you can distinguish morphologically.
Fibrosarcomas are they usually have a different morphological pattern.
Yes,
and they're very cellular.
Okay.
Infantile myofibroma, they're typically described as biphasic tumors, and you have myopericytic nodules and with primitive areas which look like hemangiopericytoma.
Yes, ma'am.
So it is totally different from infantile fibrosarcoma.
Yes, ma'am. And actually, when I was reading the literature, they were saying that it requires an extremely trained eye to distinguish between these forms. And of course, our pathology department at Kidwai was able to do it. I was feeling really proud because it's a very rare diagnosis, ma'am. And especially with the location that
extremely unusual.
Yeah,
actually, we had a child who was about 8 years old. She had presented with stridor and she had undergone tracheostomy. Biopsy showed features of infantile myofibroma. So that's how some few cases have been reported in our department.
Yeah, ma'am.
Had a typical morphological picture.
Yes, ma'am.
In fact, the problem for us was that it was not matching. The clinical presentation was not matching the histological appearance. It was very bland, hardly any mitotic figures. But when we read the radiological findings, it was going everywhere, involving the dura, everything.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
we were a bit skeptical on biopsy, whether
Yes,
it
ma'am.
still could be an infantile fibrosarcoma.
Yes,
But the
ma'am.
excision clearly showed, a similar morphology, bland cytology. So
Yes, ma'am. It was an excellent diagnosis for sure. Sir,
Just
Narendra Babu, sir.
no, nothing. So sometimes we also get some tumors like desmoplastic fibroma, fibrosarcoma, something like that. So they're all belong to the same family.
Yes,
So
sir.
how do you differentiate them and this? And then sometimes in the desmoplastic, this is specifically for pathology. To say desmoplastic, you have to see something different from this regular fibromas to say desmoplastic fibromas. And sometimes as you said, the desmoplastic fibromas are known to spontaneously regress also. Sometimes they may respond to this tamoxifen also. People have tried tamoxifen.
Yes, sir.
Other
yes,
treatment also.
yes, sir, you are right. In fact, other DD we had was desmoplastic fibroma.
Okay. So, hello. I think some echoing is there. I'll just mute, ma'am. Hello. Yeah, so like ma'am said, it is a close differential diagnosis, and I think immunohistochemistry most of the times helps us to differentiate. Possibly the site of the tumor also. And
Here it was more difficult because we didn't know whether it was bony lesion or a soft tissue lesion. So if it were to be bone, I would have preferred a diagnosis of desmoplastic fibroma actually.
Okay, ma'am. Fine, fair enough. This was definitely good. Yeah, sir. And Ramesh sir, we did review literature also. So I think this was the best. Whatever literature we reviewed, it said that surgical management is the treatment of choice. Where it is extremely disfiguring or the mortality is going to be extremely high, they have tried vincristine, actinomycin D, and cyclophosphamide based therapy, and children have shown some response to that kind of chemotherapy. But because this tumor has a tendency for spontaneous regression, it cannot be clearly said whether the regression was due to the chemotherapy or whether due to the spontaneous regression. So the role of chemotherapy, like I said, is plus minus, but surgical excision definitely has a role.
It is creditable because so many people simply rose to the occasion and came.
Yes,
thanks to all the surgical colleagues from across the city. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I feel there were two exceptional things in this particular child. One was the diagnosis per se from the Department of Pathology, and the surgery, sir. I'm extremely amazed. The way the whole thing was planned and executed. It was this child really proved that if you do teamwork, anything is possible. I was so happy the day that I saw the child after he had recovered and the edema had come down. It was truly satisfying.
Yes, that is what I also wanted to comment. I want to congratulate the surgeons. They have achieved excellent cosmetics also. I was also, it was very surprising.
Definitely, ma'am. Really. So proud to be part of this.
For anchoring the whole thing. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
So next case, please.
Next case, please. Next case, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. This is the congenital mesoblastic nephroma that Dr. Shoaib will be sharing. And Dr. Vinu, that regarding the last child, I will be sharing some content. I want you to share it after the last case is discussed. Okay, that uterine mass, because I am not able to share content over here. Yes.
Okay, sure, ma'am.
Yeah, please. The third case now. Yeah, Dr. Shoaib.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Dr. Shoaib. Please go on.
This is regarding a 1 month, 10-day-old child who has been presented with right renal mass. Biopsy showed congenital mesoblastic nephroma.
The voice is not very clear, Dr. Shoaib. Probably you need to use a mic or come closer to the mic wherever you're speaking.
This is regarding 1 month child who underwent right radical nephrectomy for CMN. So that post-operatively HP histopathology showed as mixed variety.
Yeah.
So I think this child to start for adjuvant chemotherapy, we have done some of the review on the literature.
Yeah.
In paper, like a 1-year-old girl who presented with abdominal distension and underwent radical nephrectomy. Child was on regular follow-up. After 6 months follow-up on ultrasound, there was a new lesion at the same region, for which child again underwent for excision. And again follow-up after 2 months, there was a similar lesion in the at the paracolic region, and underwent re-excision. But again after the regular follow-up, after 3 months of the third surgery, there was another lesion which was abutting left lobe of liver and posterior to the stomach, and encircling the splenic vessels. Child later underwent excision of the tumor with splenectomy. And after this fourth surgery, child was started with adjuvant chemotherapy, which is consisting of doxorubicin and carboplatin. And after this, child was tumor-free for next 31 months of age. There is another paper which showing like patient where the inference was patients older than 3 months with stage 3 cellular CMN has been found to suffer from a greater recurrence rate. And those with incomplete resection were diagnosed by positive lymph node biopsy, and patients with stage 3 cellular variants usually required adjuvant therapy. Though the post-operative chemotherapy is not recommended, the tumors with stage 1 and stage 2 and classical variant of CMN, cellular variant of CMN. However, a close follow-up of these patients should be recommended.
Okay.
Another paper like use of sarcoma-based chemotherapy in case of congenital mesoblasthic nephroma. Here they have reported a case report where after nephrectomy, child presented on follow-up with recurrent a metastatic lesion at the liver. Then they started with sarcoma-based adjuvant chemotherapy using vincristine, ifosfamide, and doxorubicin etoposide, which was treated with the chemotherapy. Another paper is like usual course of tumor is in CMN it's a benign. Nephrectomy is ultimate treatment, but few patients who develop local recurrence of metastatic tumors will be benefited with the adjuvant chemotherapy.
Okay.
Treatment for adjuvant chemotherapy is usually recommended if the patients are older than 3 months of age, or stage 3 cellular type of CMN, or will be benefited with adjuvant chemotherapy.
Okay, I think fair enough. I think what the take-home message for this particular congenital mesoblastic nephroma group would be: one is a child less than 3 months presenting with congenital mesoblastic nephroma, less likely to have recurrence. Recurrences are more likely, and the tumor is more likely to be malignant if a child is presenting more than 3 months of age. If it's a stage 1 or 2 cellular CMN, what is recommended is a close follow-up, and we can still wait for adjuvant chemotherapy. However, whatever previous literature has been discussed, stage 3 and beyond cellular CMN is where adjuvant chemotherapy has been tried. Like I said, there are previously also I've said there are no randomized controlled trials where they have segregated patients into 2 groups, where one group has been given chemotherapy and one has not been given chemotherapy, and they've compared the outcomes. All of them are anecdotal reports, but because stage 3 and 4 are more likely to metastasize and have a poorer prognosis, chemotherapy can be tried, and this chemotherapy is usually Wilms tumor based chemotherapy only, which can be used in these children. So I think the reason why the Kidwai team, the pediatric oncology team at Kidwai chose to give chemotherapy to this particular child was because it was a cellular CMN and there is a likelihood of recurrence. So that is a possible explanation why they chose to give chemotherapy to this child. Of course, the child is less than 1 month of age, so the prognosis is fairly good after complete nephrectomy, but adjuvant chemotherapy may be considered.
That's what Pooja, like the saying goes, if
Yes,
evidence-based medicine is not possible, then at least try emotion-based medicine. You don't lose anything for the baby. Do it.
Yes, sir. I agree, sir. So this is what is the gist for this particular case, and now we come to the last case, which is the child who had presented with a uterine mass. And I found some interesting review of literature. I'm not able to share it right now, but I will read the important points from that particular article which I encountered, which is very similar to the case that we have.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, who's going to be describing the last child? I think it's going to be Dr. Vidya.
Vidya.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. This is an update of the case that we had already discussed in the last meeting. Of a 9-year-old girl, this is a brief summary. She presented to us with colicky abdominal pain, bleeding per vagina with no secondary sexual characteristics, with pre-pubertal hormonal levels and normal tumor markers, with ultrasound showing endometrial hyperplasia. CT abdomen showed heterogeneous and enhancing mass lesion 18 to 5 centimeter, filling the entire uterine cavity with arterial supply from both uterine arteries. So after this, we had gone ahead and done ultrasound-guided biopsy, FNAC for this child. FNAC showed only spindle cells and endometrial cells, and IHT stained positive for smooth muscle actin and vascular channels with very low proliferative index, which suggested a benign pathology. We also went ahead with MRI pelvis. It showed irregularly mild homogeneously enhancing lesion in the anterior aspect of the endometrial cavity with fluid surrounding it and distending the endometrial cavity and extending into the anterior myometrium. Serosa was intact. We went ahead with MRI pelvis with when we considered possibility of uterine artery embolization, and we wanted to know the arterial flow patterns for this lesion.
Did you also do and Doppler, like or MRI, like I think Dr. Madhu suggested would adequately tell you the flow of
flow patterns? We had an option of Doppler and MRI. We did an MRI with arterial contrast.
Okay.
We haven't done a Doppler.
Okay.
And to get better fairer idea, we went ahead with diagnostic cystogenitoscopy. On cystoscopy, the urethra was normal, bilateral ureteric orifices were normal. There was mass effect seen at the fundus of the bladder.
Yeah.
In genitoscopy, the vagina appeared normal, cervical impression and fornices were normal, and over a guide wire, the scope was negotiated into the uterus. A bluish mass was seen in the anterior wall of the uterus.
Do you have a picture?
No, sir.
You can put it in the WhatsApp group, no? Beautiful pictures. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Go on.
The bluish mass which was seen in the anterior wall of the uterus was suggestive of a vascular malformation, more likely a venous malformation. So with this, we went ahead with some literature review to understand uterine vascular malformations. Found that there are very few.
Vijay, just a minute.
Yes, sir.
Vijay, just a minute. Just to complete the picture. What happened is there is a lot of discussion even when we were discussing the gynecologists. They said possibly is there any vaginal septum? Is there any possibility of hematocele blood side trapped inside the uterus? So we said whatever it is, we are not able to go beyond. So we said at least we'll try a cystoscopy. I mean, at least a genitoscopy. Cystoscopy was technically very demanding because in such a small site, nobody is willing to do it. So we said, okay, let me take a chance and do it. And Gauri Shankar did a fantastic job. He did a scopy, he could see the vagina was normal, he could see the cervix. And with a little manipulation, he could pass a guide wire. Over the guide wire, he did manage to get the scope itself inside the uterus. And then we could see a smooth surface all over. Posterior wall is normal. And the anterior wall, you could see a mucosa-lined bunch of grapes, like something is coming from the anterior wall, and which was suggestive of some sort of vascular malformation. in the anterior wall of the uterus in the submucosal plane. Okay, so then we'll try with the takeover from there.
Yes, sir. So yes, sir. Yes. After an interdepartmental discussion, we went ahead with the cystogenitoscopy. Then, on reviewing the literature, we found that uterine vascular malformations are very rare and with less than 100 cases reported, including congenital and acquired. Most of them were acquired cases in older post-pubertal age group, usually acquired post-trauma, post-delivery and post-gestational trophoblastic disease. Congenital AV malformations in the uterus were very rare, and they are known to be errors of morphogenesis with stable cellularity, unlike a hemangioma. They have central nidus containing blood vessels consistent with both arteries and veins with multiple vascular connections. But most of the descriptions mention that it is distributed throughout the myometrium and endometrium, unlike the picture in our case. And they're also known to invade surrounding structures, and they're associated with other pelvic vascular malformations. And vaginal bleeding is known to occur when the endothelial lining is disrupted during menstruation. But in our case, it is a premenstrual child. So the basic management principles included are spectral Doppler is recommended for diagnosis. The gold standard is, however, conventional angiography with digital subtraction. However, it is invasive, and MRI pelvis is preferable as it is non-invasive. And management depends on hemodynamic status of the patient. Our child, despite having bleeding for 1.5 years, was not anemic. Child had normal hemoglobin. Site and size of the lesion, degree of bleeding, age of the person with and desire for future fertility. So with all this in mind, we had a discussion about how to proceed next. We had interventional and medical management options. Intervention including selective uterine artery embolization. This would involve an interventional radiologist, and success rates reported in adults range between 80 to 90%, with about 17% risk of recurrence. The risk of hysterectomy is known about in literature is about 19%. The other options were laser photocoagulation or injection sclerotherapy that were described. And in medical management, oral propranolol therapy, oral sirolimus were possibilities that we considered. And in adults, we have they usually use oral contraceptive pills with oral danazol for about 12-week course in which they've seen good regression rates. So these options were discussed with the parents and also the referring gynecologist. The parents were counseled regarding the risks of bleed during uterine artery embolization and risk of hysterectomy associated. In view of the age of the child and the high risk, we went ahead with propranolol therapy.
Yeah, Vidya.
Opted for medical management. Sir?
Yeah, just to get that point. See this the embolization. The embolization is only works for if there is a classical AV malformation, high flow AV malformation.
Yes,
so
yes.
most of the uterine lesions will be very low flow AV malformation, especially if they are congenital. So since in this baby also we couldn't really identify a very real arterial feeder, so that giving that embolization was not a straightforward option. So the only thing was that embolizing the entire uterine supply. So most of these AV malformations are very, very focal. They're not generalized. So that option will be always open. Since in our patient, there is no major arterial feeder and it is not localized. So that option is out. So other options was considered was embolizing both the uterine arteries. So that is that's what we discussed, and I think that's what you told about it, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Just a point I want to make. So in the MRI as well as in the CT scan which was done, clearly showed very tortuous uterine arteries on both the sides. So definitely there is some component of AV fistula or AV malformation here. I don't think it is entirely a venous malformation. It would have definitely arrested any kind of bleeding or even the progressive increase in size of the overall lesion. The uterine artery embolization would have definitely helped. And one more point is the uterine artery embolization does not cause increase in bleeding. It actually arrests the bleeding. Bleeding is not a complication in uterine artery embolization. The complications are future infertility.
Yes, sir.
Because because the vessels are
with ovarian failure.
ovarian failure. Whereas vessels are so small, we cannot selectively go into only uterine artery.
Yes.
So in that case, ovarian failure is the complication.
Excellent point. Thank you, Anandi.
Yes.
And also, sir, when you look at the literature, the uterine artery embolization for this AV malformations are most of them, they recommend a distal embolization than a proximal embolization.
Exactly.
Because when you do proximal embolization, most of them will get the collaterals from other side and they start again behaving insane. So when you have these very small vessels, is it feasible to do that distal embolization going to the subsegmental?
It is about like what material I'm using. If I'm using a PVA particle, which is of say 75 to 150 microns, whatever I inject, it will go and sit in the capillaries only.
Okay.
So the capillaries end will be filled first. After that, I'm going to use 150 to 250 size, which will fill the artery. So in that sense, we can go deeper and we have a control also in that sense. But only thing is ovarian failure. Ovarian vessels we may not avoid.
So there will be a failure of the ovarian side also, because you are putting into the small particles, it can go anywhere, both sides.
Yeah. So sometimes what happens, the ovarian branches, which may arise from the uterine artery itself, very proximally. So in this case, the baby is so small, and the vessels are so small. My microcatheter may not cross the ovarian vessel and get into only the uterine artery. Yeah.
Okay.
That is the problem. Once I enter into the uterine artery proper, we inject everything into uterine artery only.
So in that situation, sir, in those situations, so is there any role for a laparoscopic uterine artery isolation and clipping?
No, the thing is, if you do laparoscopic, sir, you are going to clip the major vessel at its origin. But
No,
when
but if you isolate the ovarian vessel separately and then go to on the surface of the uterus and then do it, where is entering into that broad ligament in that area?
Yes, sir. If you when you're doing that, sir, you are going to block the main vessel, but the collateral circulation will develop over a period of time. So when we do endoluminally, we are going to block the capillary vessels, arterioles. At that level, we are going to block. So the chance of having a collateral will be very less.
Correct. I agree with you.
Okay.
So with
for this case, Vidya?
Sir, we decided on oral propranolol therapy after discussion with the parents and the gynecologist.
And sirolimus is backup?
With the basis of our past experience, oral propranolol we have routinely used for infantile hemangiomas as recommended for almost more than 140 cases now. In venous malformation and lymphovenous malformations, for surface lesions, we usually prefer sclerotherapy and such. But for parenchymal lesions, for 2 cases, one of liver and one of pancreas venous malformation, we have used oral propranolol therapy with some limited success. And on review of literature, it has been used in intractable lymphatic malformations and AV malformations also. It is considered as a potential novel treatment for AV malformations, as it is angioangiogenic and vasoconstrictive. There's another report where rectosigmoid colon venous malformation was successfully treated with propranolol with celecoxib combination. So after a baseline ECG and 2D echo for this child, we started at 1 mg per kg per day with monitoring of heart rate and blood glucose levels. We plan to increase the dose gradually up to 0.5 mg per kg per day, and follow up, we plan to image and see any regression in size.
Okay.
And also this cycle, this child did not have her expected bleeding per vagina.
That's great.
And I'm going to keep sirolimus as a backup?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Lovely case, lovely discussion.
Yeah,
all cases fantastic.
Yes, sir. What I wanted to discuss, sir, and I wanted to ask Dr. Madhu also. So this was a case report of a cystic myometrial lesion in the uterus of an adolescent girl. So I am not able to share the screen, but I'll just read it out. It was a 13-year-old girl who had been experiencing pelvic pain and episodic vaginal bleeding for 10 months, just like our child. And she underwent a pelvic ultrasound that found a thick-walled, isolated 3-centimeter mass in the myometrium, which was containing a fluid-filled level. Pelvic MRI revealed a large uterus with a 2.1 into 2 centimeter thickness of the wall, hemorrhagic round mass in the left uterine wall with no apparent communication to the endometrial cavity correlating with the abnormality seen on ultrasound. The lesion was considered to be a benign hemorrhagic lesion. The reason I'm asking this, sir, is like, of course, we're considering the possibility of an AV malformation, but Malti ma'am, I think you did the histopathological examination, and the IHC markers, were they suggestive of like an AV malformation, like a hemangioma or cholangioendothelioma clearly for the child? Malti ma'am, can you hear me? I think she can't. So basically it is a similar presentation in this child. Enlarged uterus, the thick-walled hemorrhagic round mass in the uterine wall. It's not communicating, but in this case we have communication with the endometrial cavity, and it was a benign hemorrhagic lesions. What they did for this particular child was, even though she was an adolescent, the child was started on oral contraceptive pills, and immediately after she was started her pelvic plane, her bleeding, as well as there was a significant interval decrease in the size of the lesion. So, like, could it be one of those conditions, like cystic myometrial lesion that we are seeing in this child? And if the child doesn't respond to propranolol, can we consider this thing? So, is cystic adenomyosis seen, sir, in this particular age group? Have you seen any cases, Madhu, sir? Madhu, sir?
No, Prija.
Yes,
Pooja, as it was a vascular lesion, we worked up with only the vascular lesion.
Yes, ma'am.
As you told me that whether it is a cystic, what you said, that
cystic adenomyosis, ma'am.
But there are no epithelial cells there.
Okay, ma'am.
CK was negative.
Okay.
There was no glandular pattern or whatever it.
Okay. Fine, ma'am. But tell me, Vidya.
In this child, the child being pre-pubertal, by giving oral contraceptive pills, won't there be any side effects like bone development?
Yeah, definitely. There can be early bone fusion, and there can be short stature, there can be hormonal issues. But like, this is only as an alternative. Like, if the lesion doesn't respond to propranolol, we've considered sacrolimus. What my contention was, like, usually, like you discussed, AV malformations, like hemangiomas and endotheliomas, they have specific markers like CD34, others which are positive, and when you give propranolol, it shows regression of the size of the lesion. So, like, can we truly call it a venous malformation? Is what is my question in this child, based on the IHC and FNAC findings? Just for the sake of discussion. I know, of course, the child has already been started on propranolol. Why I wanted to bring this up, I will share it on the group also, is because the pattern of presentation is very similar to our case. She has cyclical bleeding. She's like around that age only, around 10 to 13. She's not attained menarche. She's having cyclical bleeding, and there is a lesion within the wall of the uterus which is fluid filled, exactly like this child has presented to us. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so we can discuss this. Of course, we've started the child on propranolol therapy, and we can see how this child is going to respond. It's a very interesting case, like sir said, and we should see how she does. And if she doesn't respond, what will be our plan B and plan C for this child? Yeah.
I think it is a malformation only because the cells which are there, endothelial, which are SMA positive,
yes,
are negative for the markers of the vascular.
Okay, ma'am.
The cells.
Okay.
So with this, that is why I wrote it as, Ki67 is one of the marker which says that whether it is a neoplasia or vascular mass.
Yes, ma'am. So Ki67 was extremely low in this child.
Yes. Yes.
Fine, ma'am. Yeah. That is all then for today's discussion.
Pooja?
Yes, sir.
It's been a fantastic group of cases, and I think an excellent beginning for the year.
Yes, sir.
Please continue to have tumor boards irrespective of the number of cases. The discussions are top class. I think everybody is standing to benefit.